So let me start with a question. Should I read the Bible like any other book? Yes and no. Both of those answers are correct, depending on how you look at it. I hope you're reading through Ecclesiastes because all literature needs to be read and reread, and so there are challenges there, and after you get over the stage of Bible reading, which I call zingers. You're just kind of reading through a verse at a time till something zings you, and you think, oh, God's spoken to me, so I've read the scriptures. Well, maybe not. And God does that for sure, but there's more to reading the Bible than that. And there are really two big hurdles that get in the way from understanding the Bible. One of them is knowing too much theology when we start reading, because we immediately start putting things into theological categories, and that works sometimes it doesn't. And then the other is depending too much on theologians who know too much theology and letting them tell you what the book says, and instead of just reading it. And Ecclesiastes is a book that has so many things have been said about it that are so diverse that you really just have to settle down for reading. And so I have several purposes in teaching this class. One is to communicate what I think the message of the book is, to explore the application of that message in various ways, and then to help you learn more how to read the Bible. And there are various strategies. I mean, if you go online and you say, okay, give me some steps to help me read for comprehension. Well, there's no end of methods and things that can be taught, and they begin teaching it in elementary schools, at least according to the literature you see they are. Now, whether they're actually applying that, I don't know, because people aren't thinking very well these days. But that's not the communication's fault. It's mostly the readers. But we've started to look at some strategies with regard to the book. There's an opening metaphor that kind of controls, and there's questions, and there's repetitions. We begin to see a refrain and certain key concepts. And so I want to look at that is a concept that is pretty much overlooked in the discussion of the book. Now, I haven't read exhaustively in commentaries, but you don't see this as much as you should. And to begin with, I want to just think about a presentation or an overview of the book that I recently read. But somebody has entitled Ecclesiastes the Black Sheep of the Bible. And again, that's because it has been handled in so many different ways. And in terms of how people have handled it, it's kind of become like that, because there's just is very, very little, if any, real consensus on how the book should be understood. So kind of in my own mind, and I'm not saying that I am be able to do this on my own, I'm kind of in the stream of a process are twofold. One is to rescue it. To rescue it from the view of it being sort of a pessimistic deconstruction is what I call it. In other words, here, let's just look at what life is without God, and when we get to the end, we'll tell you what life is, in God. And there's a lot of that in the various treatments of Ecclesiastes, and I don't think that that's what the book is about. And on the flip side, to kind of restore it as being the pastoral theology that it is. It leads us to timeless truth and to wise counsel. The book ends in Ecclesiastes 12:10. The preacher sought to find out acceptable words, and that which was written blamelessly, words of truth. Now, whether or not this is the author or somebody who is writing this epilogue, and that's very likely, God's still in the process of inspiring what we have as the canonical book of Ecclesiastes. And so this is what he says it's about, and it's either true or false. I think it's true. And then the other is the wise counsel, and his counsel throughout with regard to whatever it is he's struggling with is, I commended joy because a man has no better thing under the sun than to eat and to drink and to be joyful. For that will accompany him in his labor all the days of his life, which God has given him under the sun. Now that's in Ecclesiastes 8:15. That's just one of the many refrains on this joyful living, which we will look at, and we'll look at all of those refrains in some detail. But there's one paragraph I was going to read you, but it's sitting on my desk at home. It was really a zinger. Anyway, a negative zinger. Anyway, he takes really the pessimistic view of the book, that this is, life under the sun apart from God. And then every now and then he throws in something positive. And then he says, at the end, he says, fear God and keep his commandments. Now that's what I want to kind of play off of, because that, I think, highlights one of the real problems of the book, and that is that the book cannot be taken in a linear fashion. It doesn't have a beginning and an end with logical progression. It's more what we looked at before, is that there's these cycles, this ever-expanding spiral where the very same things are said over and over and over, but with variations. So that really is not, the book doesn't lay out like that. And you don't have to be a scholar to see that. You just start paying attention and you see repetitions. Oh, well, that was back there. Oh, and it was back there. And it was back there. And we've already started to look at some of that. And so that's the first problem. And the second problem is the concept of the fear of God does not occur simply in the last statement of the book. That is throughout as well. And it is an extremely important concept, even though it's not stressed in terms of verbiage, in terms of explicating what the fear of God is. Yet it is one of, if not the most important foundational concepts in this book, and in wisdom literature as a whole, and in the Bible as a whole. And so I want to take time today to think about this term, show you how it relates to the book, but also to just underscore the fact that there are a number of unifying factors or facts in this book, and the fear of God is one of the most important. And so that's what I want to focus on today. He says the conclusion of the matter is fear God and keep his commandments. And this is the statement we find in chapter 12, verses 13 to 14. This is the end of the matter. All has been heard. Well, he said a lot, and this is saying, the whole subject, whatever it is, has been covered. That's what the statement is saying. It's either true or not true. If it's not true, why did God allow it to be appended to the book and included in the canon? Now you can say, well, what are the things we find that people say it's in the Bible, shouldn't be in the Bible? But that's how I understand it. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment with every hidden thing, whether it is good or whether it is evil. And so I want to look at the concept of the fear of God, and also then the concept of accountability just at the end to make a couple of points about that. Michael Reeves, in a book I'm going to refer to quite a bit today, a book entitled Rejoice and Tremble, observes that it's common for Christians to use awe and respect and reverence as synonyms for the fear of God. And that is certainly a part of the concept, a very great part of the concept. But he goes on to say, however, I hope we will come to see that those words actually fall quite short of capturing the intense and happy fullness of what Scripture means when it speaks of the fear of God. So I want to just lay out some things with regard to this word, how it's used. And a lot of this won't be new, but he adds a concept that I think is really helpful for us to think about. So the fear of God actually has two prongs, the fear of God. There is a dread or terror of consequences aspect to that. So this word is used in context, for instance, where there's fear of physical danger, and there's terror over what's going to happen. There's fear that God will judge, and that's a terror. That's a very negative thing. And so this word, yareh, in the Hebrew text is used in that sense. But there's also the other direction where it does speak of reverence, of awe, of respect, of devotion with respect to God. So it does have a broad range of meanings, and it has the very negative connotation, but it also has a very positive aspect. And that's what I want to spend some time looking at today. Now, it is a key concept in the book of Proverbs. And as we read through Proverbs, we will see, for instance, in 1:7, that it is the controlling principle of knowledge. Well, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. It goes on later and say it's the foundation of wisdom. The fear of the Lord is the beginning, the foundation of wisdom in Proverbs 9:10. It is instruction in wisdom. So the fear of God has the idea of that which teaches or instructs us in the relationship and behavior before God. It's expressed as hatred of evil, and it results in a prolonged life. So this is a key concept in the book of Proverbs, not by its numerical occurrences, but in the very strategic statements that relate it to being necessary, the necessary starting point, the necessary foundation of knowledge and wisdom, which are the main ideas in the book of Proverbs. And so Reeves makes the point that while reverence and awe and respect are there, that there's also another element to it, which would be have to be captured in the words of amazement or even trembling. And he, in his book, Rejoice and Tremble, it's all about how the fact that joy and trembling before God are not antithetical concepts. They go together. And I want to share some of the thoughts with you because they impacted me, and I think they're helpful for us to think through for a few moments. Psalm 2:11 says, "Serve the Lord with fear and rejoice with trembling." Isn't that an interesting statement? And I hadn't thought about it too deeply, and as I was reading this book, I said, yeah, that's a packed statement. Fear, serve Yahweh, serve the Lord with fear. Now, is that the trembling, afraid of punishment? No, that's not what that's talking about. And rejoice with trembling. So these may be the flip sides of the same coin, but they're the same coin. And it's worth thinking about that. This is Reeves' statement, Michael Reeves. He says, "This right fear of God, then, is not the minor key, gloomy flip side to proper joy in God." Okay? It's not the opposite of joy in God. There's no tension between this fear and joy. Rather, this trembling fear of God is a way of speaking about the sheer intensity of the saint's happiness in God. In other words, the biblical theme of the fear of God helps us to see the sort of joy that is most fitting for believers. So he's actually describing this as an aspect of joy, this fear. He goes on to say this, "Our desire for God and delight in Him are not intended to be lukewarm. As our love for God is a trembling and wonder-filled love, so our joy in God is, at its purest, a trembling and wonder-filled, yes, fearful joy." Okay, let's go let that sink in, okay? "For the object of our joy is so overwhelmingly and fearfully wonderful. We are made to rejoice and tremble before God, to love and enjoy Him with an intensity that is fitting for Him, and what more befits His infinite magnificence than an enjoyment of Him that is more than our frail selves can bear, which overwhelms us and causes us to tremble." Now let me make sure I read that right. "And what more befits His infinite magnificence than an enjoyment of him that is more than our frail selves can bear, which overwhelms us and causes us to tremble. So this idea of overwhelming is what he's getting at, and at this point he refers to this text before us, and I'm just going to finish reading this a little bit because it relates directly to Ecclesiastes. He says this extraordinary pairing of joy with fear can be seen well when two wise and famous statements are put together. One speaks of the whole duty of man, Ecclesiastes, and the other of man's chief end. Both are about the same thing, the purpose for which we are made. The first statement is from the book of Ecclesiastes, where the preacher concludes his argument. The end of the matter, all has been heard. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. The second statement is the first answer from what? The Westminster Shorter Catechism, which tells us man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. Should we fear God and keep his commandments, or glorify God and enjoy him forever? There's no contradiction, for they are describing the same truth. Those who fear God glorify him, as they sing the song of the victorious in Revelation 15:4. Who will not fear, O Lord, and glorify your name? Not only that, when the preacher calls us to fear God, he is calling us precisely to the exquisite and glorifying enjoyment of God that Westminster calls the chief end of man. So that's in Michael Reeves' Rejoice and Tremble. I don't share everything in terms of the theological tradition that he comes from, but this is an extremely valuable book with regard to thinking through this. And he's written a couple of other books in this vein that I've appreciated and benefited from. So what triggers this overwhelming that results in joyous trembling? What comes to mind from the scriptures, remember Paul and Barnabas are at Lystra, and they create a miracle, and they're about to be worshipped as gods. These people were so overwhelmed with what they'd seen that their response was to treat them as God. Okay, when the Apostle John there's a manifestation of Christ to him, and he sees this visage, and what does he do? Falls down on the earth as dead. Okay, he was overwhelmed with the vision of the person whom he had known for 3 years in the most intimate association and friendship as he was on the earth before his glorification. And I remember once I was walking across the seminary campus, and I was working on my master's thesis, and it was in the Old Testament. It had to do, there was this one verse that the accent on a certain word had some importance with understanding the verse. And so I saw my Old Testament professor walking across the campus, and I just stopped and I said, you know, I'm dealing with this accent, and I probably knew the name of the accent, I don't know now. and he said, well, that's in Wikis Volume 2, page 40. I'm sure I said thank you, but that's what I trembled at that, not physically, but that it just blew me away. Now, maybe he'd been reading it that morning. Who knows? That happens. God in his sovereignty does things like that. And doesn't that overwhelm us? Oh, you prepared me for this. And I've had that happen. You've had that happen. But that's, that's the way it is. There are half a dozen people in this room who I have had that experience with. Oh, I can't believe it. You know, just kind of, the term we use is blew me away, okay? Okay? And if I got to know all of you, there would be something about you that would probably blow me away. You know, I think somebody who's taught the 2-year-olds for 30 years, that blows me away. What devotion, what commitment. I mean, there are things that do that to us. And that's the kind of thing that's going on here. When we lived in Canada, we were in Alberta, and so we spent quite a lot of time in the Canadian Rockies. And one of my favorite places was Athabasca Falls. It was a river that ran through, and it was close to the highway, and it was this impressive. It was like a mini Niagara Falls, but for the Canadian Rockies. I mean, you stand right there, and you hear it, you feel it, you see it, this power. And you're drawn to it and its beauty and appreciation, but it's terrible force. You don't want to be in it, but it is overwhelming. And, when you think of, well, that's one of the little things that God has created, then, I'm overwhelmed with who He is. That's the kind of an idea that's going on here. So the point is that there are things and people and events that overwhelm us to the point of emotional trembling, if not actually physical trembling. So what do we do to experience this with God? And he develops this in the book. An interesting kind of sidelight. Aristotle, followed by Aquinas, held that righteous acts are what makes a righteous person. So you just go out and do, and then you become. Martin Luther said, "Nah, I tried that. Doesn't work. Doesn't work." So the change of heart is needed, not self-improvement. If you're going to change your being, it has to start from within. And of course, for him, it was the gospel that justifies and declares one to be righteous. And then you can become righteous flowing from that. So it's that change comes as the Holy Spirit captivates us with the awesomeness of our God and Savior as we contemplate through the Scriptures His person and His work. And passages like Psalm 145, 5-7. "Oh, the glorious majesty of your honor, oh, your wondrous works, of your wondrous works I will meditate. Men will speak of the might of your awesome," and the word there is actually fearful, acts. "I will declare your greatness. They will utter the memory of your great goodness and will sing of your righteousness." So these acts that cause astonishment and awe, and that's what the Bible is all about, isn't it? From beginning to end, our awesome God who reveals Himself and manifests Himself. And so there's just some examples here that Reeves includes. For instance, when we're overwhelmed, with God's goodness. 1 Samuel 12:24 says, "Only fear the Lord and serve Him faithfully with all your heart. For consider what great things He has done for you." So it's great things He's done for the universe, but also just for us individually. And we should never let go of that. So when we consider His great goodness, then as we really let it sink in, it eventually will cause us to tremble in amazement, to just be overwhelmed is the idea. Or of God's wisdom. "Who would not fear you, O King of the nations? For this is your due. For among all the wise ones of the nations and in all their kingdoms, there is none like you." He's the wise one. He's the one that all things revolve around. Or God's holiness, Revelation 15:4. "Who will not fear, O Lord, and glorify your name, for you alone are holy." And then His greatness, Deuteronomy 10. Moses says, "Now Israel, what does the Lord your God require of you but to fear the Lord your God, to walk in all His ways, to love Him, to serve the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great, the mighty, and the awesome God, who is not partial and takes no bribe." So His greatness. And then His forgiveness. Psalm 130. "But with you there's forgiveness, that you may be feared." So he says in each case, believers are enjoying these beautiful perfections of God. It's not that some of His attributes cause us to love and enjoy Him, while others cause us to flinch. And so it's just this idea that As we read the Bible, that's one of the chief things we ought to be doing. God, show me yourself. Show me yourself in particular ways and in the sum of your magnificence. And allow ourselves to meditate on it until we're sufficiently impressed, till we're overwhelmed. And just practice that sort of as the habit, the habit of our being. We used to sing that song, "Were you there when they crucified my Lord?" And it causes me to tremble, tremble. And it goes on through every aspect of what God has done causes us to tremble. And when I've sung that song, well, okay, tremble. I don't ever remember shaking, but it's just the emotional being overwhelmed with what God has done. Now, the point that we need to make, the general point with regard to Ecclesiastes, is that with Proverbs, the wisdom and fear are intertwined. They're not separate. They're categories that relate to each other like in a circle back and forth. Fear is I fear God, and that's the only way I can develop wisdom. But as I act wisely, I am fearing God in my activity. And so that's why I think we can't minimize this concept in the book. We're going to look at some passages in the book itself. But in Proverbs 2, and Solomon is writing this, "My son, if you will receive my words and store up my commandments within you, so as to turn your ear to wisdom, apply your heart to understanding. Yes, if you call out for discernment and lift up your voice for understanding, if you seek her, as wisdom as silver, search for her as for hidden treasures, then you will understand the fear of the Lord and find the knowledge of God." So they go together. The whole book of Ecclesiastes is a book of wisdom, okay? Now, there's a problem in it. There's something that aggravates Solomon, but he's not being aggravated by the experience of foolishness. He's being aggravated by the fact that he can't understand the mechanism by which God manifests his greatness in his providential ruling of the universe and of the affairs of men. That's far different than saying, I can't find meaning in life, or I'm despairing of the way to live. And so wisdom and fear of the Lord are bound up, and they appear all the way through the book. It's not just at the end. And so that's what I want us to be impressed with. This is a little diagram that I used in teaching Proverbs with regard to this idea of the fear of the Lord. First of all, it's an attitude or a disposition toward God. So that's the fundamental the meaning of this fear. I so honor him. I so appreciate him. I am so positively awed by him that he is the all. He is my focus. He is the controller. All right. And that then is to develop, to then proceed into appropriate behavior. So that's the ongoing, that's the behavioral aspect. I don't behave in order to get an appreciation of God. I am overwhelmed with God, and that it motivates and empowers me to behave like him. And so that's the proper order. And then it all ends up being a partnership where I'm actually performing who God is and what he does in partnership with him, not in my strength, but in my frailty. And that's why this fear doesn't drive us away from God. If I'm focused on my frailty and my inadequacy, that's going to mean I'm terrified of God because I can't measure up. But the right kind of fear brings me closer to God because I'm impressed not just with his greatness and his power, but I'm impressed with what he has done for me, how he has provided for me in Christ and in his grace. And so this is a concept you can see that ties everything together. And it occurs throughout the book. For instance, we first find the word occurring in chapter 3, not chapter 12. Okay? Chapter 3. And we've looked at this. there is, I know that whatever God does, it shall be forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken from it. And God has done it. Why? That men should fear him. See, before he's even gotten finished with the first cycle of this whole theme, he's got fear in here. That which is has been long ago, and that which is to be has been long ago, and God seeks again that which is passed by. Is that not wondrous? Yeah, we live in the present, remembering the past, anticipating the future. God lives outside and above all of that. And that overwhelms me. So the context here is that because God stands outside of time, no matter of judgment escapes his attention. I'm perplexed over why judgment doesn't happen in this case, and misfortune happens in that case. God isn't. God isn't, and that's what the book is about. And so I can revere him because he's outside of time, and he's computing it all, and it'll all be dealt with. It'll all be dealt with. In chapter 5, verses 6 and 7, don't allow your mouth to lead you into sin. Don't protest before the messenger that this was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your voice, destroy the work of your hands? For in the multitude of dreams there are vanities, there are vaporousness, as well as in many words, but you must fear God. Now, this makes no sense to out of context. We'll look at this passage in some detail. But the context is manipulating God in a hollow worship for material gain. And we'll look at this passage and I'll explain how that's what's going on. That's more than just foolish, it's dangerous. So he says, fear God. Don't play games with God in worship. Don't think that you're making your way. God is to be honored and respected. And so it's a counter. It's really a counter to false religion, to playing games with God, to making bargains with God. God doesn't do that. Fear him. Respect him. Be in awe with who he is. Don't try to think you can manipulate him. So this concept of fear is being used in a strategic place to make a point about responding to this temptation to play games with God in things like worship. Chapter 7, verses 15 to 18. All this have I seen in my days of vapor. There's a righteous man who perishes in his righteousness, and there's a wicked man who lives long in his evil doing. That's frustrated all of us, and it particularly frustrated Solomon. Solomon was a wise man, a man of justice, a man who showed, for instance, to the Queen of Sheba, his wisdom with regard to how to make righteous judgments. And she was awed by him, okay? She was awed by him. Well, that's God. Don't be overly righteous, neither make yourself overly wise. We'll talk about this. Why should you destroy yourself? Don't be too wicked, neither be too foolish. Why should you die before your time? It's good that you should take hold of this. Yes, also from that, don't withdraw your hand, for he who fears God will come forth from them. We'll unpack this in a future session. But the point here is both false confidence in righteousness to keep oneself safe and carelessness about sin are to be avoided. Fear God instead. Yeah, so you can say, well, if the good die young and the righteous prosper, what's the value in going either way? I'll just live like I want. Now, that's a response to the mystery of God's providential designs and the fact that he allows these enigmatic reversals, but that's not the right response. The right response is to fear God. He's the one who's got this all in control. I can't even begin to see how I compute that. If I were judge, I would do this. Oh yeah, okay, you do this there, and then that, how would that affect this? And this, and this, and this, and this. Duh. Not too long before we get stumped if we put ourselves in the place of the God of the universe. And so you can see how his appeal to fear God, trust him, be in awe with the fact that he is the omnipotent judge, and he will rectify all matters. Chapter 8. Though a sinner commits crimes 100 times and lives long, yet surely I know that it will be better with those who fear God. Okay? There's a statement of faith, positive statement. who are reverent before him. And I've put in there who fear before him, same word. But it shall not be well with the wicked, neither shall he lengthen days like a shadow, because he doesn't fear before God. Now this is a little different here, because it just says fear God, the verb with God as the object. But here there's a word added, the word which is translated in our English text before. Whenever the Old Testament talks about coming into the presence of someone, the word behind that is the word face, okay? Coming into the face of somewhere. Now, we use the term, in your face. That means up close and personal, right? And so that's actually the metaphor here. Hebrew uses concrete things as metaphorical. So it talks about the bowels of compassion. Compassion doesn't come from the heart, it comes from the bowels. Because your stomachs get upset at certain emotional things, right? Okay, and some of us more than others, all right? My stomach gets upset when it doesn't have food, but that's just me. So this is the face. So the concept here is, fear God in just a general way, but this is almost when you're face to face with God. When you're up close and you're interacting with God, you see, so it's actually going to that more personal in these two phrases, which I think is very, very interesting. So the context: despite enigmatic reversals of the reap what you sow rule of life, fearing God is still required. Okay, well, God, you let him get away with that. Why aren't you letting me get away with this? God says, you're playing games. Fear me. Respect me. Just become consumed with who I am and what I'm doing and what I've asked you to do and what I stand to make you become. And let the rest of it go. Okay? So Solomon he can't solve the problems of providence, but he's not going to turn his back on the God who does have the solution to the problems, even though they're not going to be revealed in our time. And so just the appeal to the fear of the Lord is what we find here. So those are, you can see it occurs throughout. It occurs a number of times. And when you remember that fear and wisdom go hand in hand, they come as a pair. They produce and act off of each other. And so this is wisdom literature, and when the Israelites would read this, they would read this with Proverbs in mind. They would read this with an understanding of this concept of the fear of the Lord. This isn't coming off the wall from some Greek philosopher who's just making up terms to try and spin his take on reality, metaphysical, psychological, whatever. Which brings us to the other side of this, and that is the whole idea of accountability. Fear God because everyone will give an account, okay? Don't fear me because you understand what I'm about. Don't fear me because you agree with all my decisions in time, with what I allow in time. Fear me because I'm God. And remember that all those things that bother you, they bother me, and I'll take care of them in the right time and in the right manner. So, the end of the book, 12, 13, and 14, this is the end of the matter. All has been heard. Fear God, keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. For God will bring every work into judgment and every hidden thing, whether it is good or evil. This word evil occurs throughout the book. Sometimes it just means bad, like, I had a bad day. Now, if you want to make it the book sound worse than it is, you translate that evil everywhere. You don't have to. It's just a bad day, okay? But it does have a moral connotation in some contexts. Very clearly, we've got this idea of accountability. I'm living to the point where God will reward me now as He sees fit. He will discipline me now as I need. But there's going to be a final accounting too. And that can only be if there's an eternal God who's above time and outside of any particular place. We've seen this already in the book, in chapter 3, verses 14 to 17. This is that passage that we looked at in some detail, that which is has been, that which is to be, and so forth. And then the last verse, 17, I said in my heart, God will judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time there for every purpose and every work. That is, a wicked man prolongs his life in his wickedness, and he dies, and it may not be as an act of punishment. Well, he didn't get punished. Well, God's still there, and that man's still there, and outside of time, God can still rectify that, all right? And that's what this verse is talking about. So accountability is not just to now. What am I going to get out of it? What am I going to get today out of it? It's deferred. Everything God will deal with terms of accountability. This idea occurs also in chapter 9, verses 1 and 7. For all this I laid to my heart, even to explore all this, that the righteous and the wise and their works are in the hand of God. And in verse 7 he says, go your way, eat your bread with joy, drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already accepted your works. So, is God concerned with our works? Yes. Does he pay attention to them? Yes. Are we going to see all that goes on into that now? No. In chapter 11 and verse 9, rejoice, young man, in your youth. Let your heart cheer you in the days of your youth, and walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know that for all these things, God will bring you into judgment. This theme of accountability runs through the whole book, and it occurs in various contexts and in various ways, but it's not just a tack on at the end. Now, does that sound like anything from the New Testament? Yeah. Sounds an awful lot like the concept of the Bema, the judgment seat of Christ. 2 Corinthians 5:10, we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each one, now he's talking to Christians, may receive what is due for what he has done in the body, whether good or evil. Romans 14:10, for we all stand before the judgment seat of God. And a whole bunch of other verses in the New Testament that have the same concept. So this isn't just a New Testament theology, this is Old Testament theology, and we see it laid out in the book of Ecclesiastes, the book that tells us how to live life joyously as a gift of God, as a gift of God. So this is what gives us the third part of our statement of the whole book. Yes, it's true that Solomon is frustrated in his exhaustive efforts to understand God's providential design as it impacts our earthly experience. There are a lot of things that just, exasperate us when we consider that. Things in our own personal experience, things in the experience of those who we know. The response, God doesn't allow us to make or approve of the response of despair or rebellion. He says, here, you make a choice. These things, bad things happen to you. Here's what I want you to do. Enjoy life as a gift of God. He concludes that one must still enjoy life as a gift of God. It's the refrain that occurs 5 or 6 times, depending on how you split it up, and we'll look at these as a whole in a future session. So that's my response right now. That's my response right now. I can let all the rest of the stuff I don't understand go. Why? Because we should live responsibly by trusting the one to whom he must ultimately give an account. It's all there. It's all there. And so the end of the book summarizes that, but it doesn't introduce it. Those ideas have been introduced and developed in various ways all the way through the book. So this is, what I'm about is to let you know what I think the whole book is about, and then, put some pieces in, some pieces that have helped me in processing how to get a hold of the whole. And that's why I just think this is an ode to joy for when life sings off key. You just cringe when somebody's singing the national anthem and they don't stay in the same key and they don't sing in whatever key they're in when they're in that key. You think, how'd they get that job? Okay. Well, life is like that in a lot of ways. People that love choral music, they love to hear the on key and the harmonies, and I've sung in choral groups, and it's a delight. I just love it. But life isn't like that. We got more disharmony, more dissonance. That's the word I'm looking for. And Bach was a master at dissonance and consonance and bringing the distance together to resolve the dissonance, and that's what life is about. In fact, he was mimicking Luther's view of aesthetics with regard to the gospel, that it's Christ is bringing into harmony that which has become dissonant because of sin. And Bach was consciously interpreting that. So that's what it's about. And I think that's what makes the book the most sense out of the book. And it's what really helps us to restore the pastoral intent of it. It really is counsel. How to live life when life isn't working like you think it should. It isn't even working like God says it generally would if you do this. That's what's going on in the book. And it's a masterful piece of work by one who really was in a position to comment on those things. Well, we will come back and review some of these themes, go into a little deeper on the refrains, and as we go through the book and add parts, and we will come back and develop in some detail the last couple of chapters, which expand this whole thing of how should you live? How should you live as a young person? How should you live at any age, at any time?